they're images that you haven't seen before, and they're original images from the witnesses when the incidents occurred, which of course is important because with some of these cases, like with Travis's or like with the Allagash, those are images that we've seen that were created years after that are kind of more impressive and more fun to look at, more colorful. But it's always good to look at both so you can see, how the original impressions differ from the current impressions. And so it was a lot of fun, really interesting.
Well, we just found out that our me restarting OBS was the trick. It's working
That
fine
did
now.
it.
Yeah, and who knows why that ever happens. But anyway, what I'm going to do,
I hope it wasn't the flux capacitor. I,
I bet that's
this
what
is
it
a
was.
very strange technology, akin to Doctor Who's time travel technology, and it could have had some sort of negative reaction to your equipment. And if it did, I apologize
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that.
Well, we're we're good now. It's not
Good.
affecting it any longer. So,
Yeah.
so now the listeners on YouTube, what I'm going to do is I'll edit the YouTube, but now the listeners on YouTube can hear you, and we're all good. And so
Hello, YouTube. It is I, Alejandro Rojas.
finally, and and you did a great interview with George Knapp, one of my
Oh,
favorite people that's involved in looking at the subject. And so that's on Open Minds and
yes.
as
Can
a
I talk to that?
podcast and
Speak to
also
that
on
a little
YouTube.
bit?
What's that?
Can I talk? Sir, can I talk about that a little bit?
Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Yeah.
Okay, and I've got other news too. There's other news I could talk about, so I got some good stuff for you. But the George Knapp interview, I just want to express how important this interview was for me. He really opened up in a way I've never heard him open up before, and it was kind of funny because we were at the Devil's Tower. I do, a YouTube live thing on Thursdays at 6, and I've committed to my people that I know I'm busy. I'm all over the place, and for the last few months, Race can definitely attest to this. I was not consistent for a long time with output for Open Minds, and so I've committed that I'm going to do this thing.
That's right.
So at 6 o'clock, I put on. We were still in the middle of a panel, so I just showed that, and then from there I had to run to do this interview with George. So I had to go find a corner and then get this interview done. But he opened up and shared stuff that I was really surprised he shared. So people have to listen to that. And I know we got to go to break soon. So, but some of what he shared was like Senator Harry Reid, just how far back his relationship with Bigelow goes, which it goes very, very far.
Do you know approximately how long? I mean, they were friends before anything. Were they connected? I think they were connected
They
before.
were.
Hmm.
So Harry Reid represented Bigelow as a lawyer back in the day, and so that's how they met.
Wow.
And then here their shared interest in the paranormal came up way back when. So George has been keeping Harry Reid apprised, or I'm sorry, Robert Bigelow has been keeping Harry Reid apprised of all of their paranormal research for all of these years. In fact, Harry Reid sometimes had come to the office to kind of hang out and be there during meetings and to talk about all this. So this all, goes way back. But what's interesting is Robert Bigelow did not ask Harry Reid for funding for their research. Actually, what had happened is a DIA agent had read George Knapp's book about Skinwalker Ranch. And so, and I should have said, George Knapp is a investigator journalist with tons of awards who works in Las Vegas. He is the one who made Area 51 famous, really, with his investigation, for which he won an award for that, too.
But we have to cut the break here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll finish this up after that.
Yeah, sure. And hold that thought right where you are. All right, everyone, this is Martin with Podcast UFO on KGRA Radio. And my current guest is Alejandro Rojas. We'll be right back.
Martin, we're in the clear, and we've got 3.5 minutes in this break, roughly.
Got it. 3.5 minutes. I got the timer on. Alejandro, so we're still live on YouTube.
Okay.
But we need to talk about something different on the break. That's what I promised everyone. So then
Okay.
we'll pick up where we were about Harry Reid after that. I think it's been.
Maybe.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you have a topic, or I have several topics?
Sure, I might as well. And thanks for we're just winging it here, but you seem much more prepared than I am without a guest. So, yeah, go ahead, say something. We got about 3 minutes or so.
3 minutes.
All right.
Can you hear me?
So let's talk really quickly, I guess,
Sure.
then on this latest story by Cheryl Costa. She writes for Syracuse New Times, and her latest story is really interesting. We were talking about triangular-shaped UFOs earlier, and she essentially was making the argument that if you pull out the more mundane shapes out of the UFO databases that she monitors, in particular MUFON. Of course, she wrote a book about MUFON UFO sightings and the statistics and where sightings are seen and all of that. But if you pull out the odd shapes, the normal shapes, like let's say stars or a point of light or a blimp, which could of course be a blimp, and you look at the really odd shapes where people are, for instance, saying they say a very clear triangular shape. That's a little bit harder to explain away. If someone's seeing this, large triangle hovering in the sky, that's harder to say what that is than if it's just a point of light moving steadily across the sky. So it was really interesting that she does this, because when she pulled this out, you can see that even with these cases where the shapes are very odd, where people are very clear that they're seeing a very oddly shaped, structured craft, that you still have thousands and thousands of these types of sightings. And her argument is to the skeptics that this demonstrates that, there's a lot more data. There are a lot better cases, there are a lot of very good cases out there that demonstrate that there's truly something mysterious going on.
Wow, amazing. Guess what? I believe
What?
our guest is on.
Aha.
Joseph?
Can you see me?
We can't see you. You have to turn your camera on. And I'm not hearing really great audio, but you made it.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can find out how I can turn on the camera here. Can you hear me?
Right on Skype itself. There you are.
There it is.
All right. So Alejandro, why don't we go into after this break is over, we'll go into it. We have another. Yeah, you're on camera. Do you have any type of audio, or are you just talking into your computer, Joseph? Can you hear me, Joseph?
I have. I'm sorry. Do you see me yet?
Yeah, I see. Yeah, we see you. We got you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that mix-up.
All right. So just hang in there, Joseph, because we have to go into back into the show here in just a few seconds, and then I'll introduce you to KGRA Radio. So hang on.
Okay.
Race anytime.
10 seconds to bumper.
Okay, very good. Hang in, we'll be right back.
All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, everyone, welcome back. You're with Martin Willis at Podcast UFO. My guest is Alejandro Rojas. He's been filling in for our other guest who just called in, so he'll be joining us in just a second. So Alejandro, before I call in Joseph Burkes, can you please finish where we were at? Harry Reid?
I'll finish where we were, and then I do want to get into another story. Just give people a heads up real quick.
Sure.
Yes, that this DIA agent had read George Knapp's book on Hunt for the Skinwalker, and he contacted them. This was around 2007, and actually, what people may not know, this is another thing George had shared, is that during this period of time, the early 2000s, the paranormal phenomena had really subsided. So not what much was going on. In fact, that's one of the reasons, since there wasn't much going on, that that George Knapp was allowed to print the book. So they wrote the book. This guy read the book, and he asked if he could come check it out. Normally they say no, of course, but since he was a DIA agent, they did allow him. He immediately had his own paranormal phenomena, and he has not wanted to share his name or exactly what had happened, but it was something where he saw something clearly that shook him to the core, essentially.
Wow.
So he immediately went to Harry Reid, who he knew, and said, hey, we really need to be investigating this. What's going on there? And Harry Reid said, you know what, you're right, because he knew Harry Reid was aware of the whole investigation and what was going on. So that's when Harry Reid had gone to his colleagues, other senators, to say, hey, let's fund this program. And that's when the funding came. So it wasn't at the behest of Robert Bigelow. In fact, George Knapp was very clear and adamant that this idea that, this was one hand shaking the other type of thing was ridiculous. That's total BS, he said. So it's something he wants to make clear, that this was independent how that happened. But this is just one example of him being very, very open. So it was incredible interview. In fact, I need to transcribe it. I'm going to get it transcribed soon, and I'm going to put it on the internet and probably even write a story, because it's some really, really good information. But before I go, so you could get into your interview with your guests now that they've arrived, I just wanted to mention also that, the History Channel has been doing this. They're preparing for this television show, Project Blue Book, that's going to be about real UFO cases. And so in preparation, they've had some journalists writing about real cases that they're going to cover on this television show for the History Channel. And they did write another one recently, which was called When Dozens of Korean War GIs Claimed a UFO Made Them Sick. And we talked about this the other day, so you're familiar with this too, right? So this was a really interesting one that happened in May 1951 during the Korean War, where this blinking object, pulsating, kind of moved towards them and had an effect on these people.
A long-term effect.
Right.
Yeah.
So great story. So keep an eye on History Channel, because they're really releasing some really cool stuff. So other than that, the only other thing is really Newsweek wrote about Blink 182 and their involvement with this Pentagon program, and essentially saying, if this was a real Pentagon program, what are you doing coming and speaking at the MUFON Symposium to a bunch of UFO goofballs? And Elizondo essentially saying, they've been into this for a long time. They've been researching it. That's why we're talking to them. They know what we're talking about. So very interesting story there.
It's really, if you think about it, it's really kind of a shame. I know that there are parts of the UFO field that are a bit fringy, but still, it really is kind of a shame that they just put them together as a whole ball of wax. And because there are some serious people, and as well as I do, there's some highly intelligent people that are not fringy that are trying to figure this out, because there is definitely something to this, and there's a lot of people that get that. So it's kind of a shame that we're viewed as all weirdos. I understand we're just a small percentage of the people out there that have an interest in this topic, but still.
And just because we're weird, just because I'm a weird doesn't mean I'm not serious about the topic.
That's right. Exactly. Hey,
all right.
Thanks so much for filling in. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. And I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Talk to you later. Have a good show.
All right. Thank you. All right. So our guest, Joseph Burkes MD, he's a board-certified internal medicine physician. He retired from the Southern California Permanente Group after 30 years of service in 2008. During the 1960s through the 1980s, he was a volunteer at Volunteer Peace and Social Justice activist working with physicians for social responsibility, the United Farm Workers Union, and pro-labor coalitions that were part of the occupational health and safety movement. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm getting up from my sick bed, but I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. So you've been sick today. That's why I haven't heard from you. Wow. Well,
Yeah, but I'm better. I took Tylenol, and I looked in the mirror, and my doctor says you're well enough to do the show, and I appreciate coming on very much. I'll be late.
well, as long as you don't have arguments with your doctor, right? When you're looking in
Um,
the mirror and you lose them. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So you look pretty good for a sick person, but anyway, I'm glad you made it and glad you called in. And it's funny when you called in, I heard a voice. I said, "Who the heck's that?" And my son figured it out. So, but anyway, can you tell the person that's never heard you before a little bit about your background and what
yeah,
got you interested in the UFO topic?
sure. Well, being a child of the space age, I was born in 1949, and I grew up watching with great excitement the developments in space exploration, Sputnik in 1957, and then the Americans and the Russians racing to get to the moon, which the United States. And of course, I was a fan of Star Trek, as so many of the audience was. I remember seeing the first show sort of mid-season. It was called The Menagerie, and which has significance in terms of what I'll be talking about a little later about the mechanisms of contact and how UFO intelligence is used delusion. For those people who don't recall, The Menagerie was the pilot which sold the show and focused on the Star Trek team visiting a planet which had aliens with tremendous psychic ability that could create illusions, sort of a virtual reality. And this theme was later picked up, some 30 years later in the blockbuster tricks. But my interest was not really anything related to UFOs other than being curious about science fiction and following the space race. I was a peace and social justice activist, as you mentioned, and I tried to integrate my work as a medical doctor. I'm an internal medicine physician with my activities in terms of social justice movements. So I was active with the Farm Workers Union. I helped recruit medical staff for their clinics in the San Joaquin Valley when I was a medical student. And I was also later on as a young doctor, what was called the Occupational Health and Safety Movement. This was a movement to educate the public and around the medical hazards of work in an attempt to make the workplace a safer place. So I didn't really think about UFOs really at all, other than maybe the 1975 program focused on the Betty and Barney Hill experience. And then I also saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind, like millions of other people. So in 1990, I embarked upon a project which involved building a studio for my wife in our home in Los Angeles, California, partner in the Permanente Medical Group, Southern California, Kaiser, a very large health organization. And
Good one, actually. Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
I was part of their
30 years. Yes. And so things were going well with the project. The roof was off of our home. It was rainy season. It was very wet for my wife and children, who were huddled in one part of the house that had a roof, but the rest of the house was open to the air. And so I went to the local library. I was working also a lot of overtime, remodel to build the studio for my wife. And I said, I'm so frustrated. I need something to distract me. What do you have? And I thought, I don't know, UFOs. So they gave me a book, The Incredible Gulf Breeze Sighting. It was about Ed and Frances Walters, a couple in Florida who were in the middle of a major wave of UFO sightings on the Gulf Coast and not far from Pensacola, Florida. And I read the book. I was fascinated. I read another and then another. And after about a year, I got enough courage to go to UFO meetings. It was a UFO Expo West. And there I met a tall, bearded doctor who was also working emergency room, as was I at the time. And he said his name was Dr. Stephen Greer. and he stated that he had developed a technique of attracting UFOs to secure locations where, using consciousness techniques, basically telepathy, thought projection, he claimed he was able to attract UFOs to these research sites. And at the UFO Expo West symposium, he also showed videos of that encounter that he had in March of 1992, where not one, not two, but three typical Gulf UFOs staffed with a power ring underneath interacted with the 40 or so people that Dr. Greer had brought out into the beach to interact with him. So the videos had a very dramatic effect on his recruiting campaign. And given the fact that he was an emergency room doctor and I was working ER, I thought this man is probably credible. And I flew cross country in June, took one of his seminars, and there on the beach in West Palm Beach, UFO. It was a blue-green light that shot across, coming in from the Atlantic. There was a cloud cover. It was anomalous in that it was totally silent. I had no explanation, but Dr. Greer said it was a UFO, and I was very impressed. So I decided I would try to be a working group coordinator, although I hadn't really done very much in terms of consciousness work, although I took a Silva mind control when I was in medical school, which was a very popular course that taught people rudimentary psi skills. And I practiced the techniques of the Silva mind control. And to my delight, I found that it actually helped me find parking spaces. I was driving around Boston. I was in medical school, and I would go into a very relaxed state as I was driving around, and I would see where the parking space was in my mind's eye, and most of the time, there it was. So I had some background in psi, but certainly not in an attempt to attract what were called secure research sites. Dr. Greer came out to California. He did a workshop for people in the San Fernando Valley, where I worked as a Kaiser staff physician. And as soon as we started going out into the field, we started having sightings. The Golden Globes appeared. To point out, it was very close to a strategic military facility, the Department of Energy site in the Santa Susana Pass, which is at the borderline between Los Angeles and Ventura. And it separates, the Santa Susana Pass is a mountainous region of high desert that separates the San Fernando Valley from Simi Valley. And what I found was that while we were doing the field work, anomalous objects appeared. Now, there was a long history of sightings in this area, which I was not aware of at the time. The Santa Susana Pass, where this Department of Energy site was, and during the 1950s, according to one of our Kaiser patients who was a carpenter at the time, he was there working on this defense facility, and he said that for 3 months back in the 1950s, this Department of Energy site was basically, they hollowed out this mountain, and for 3 months, dump trucks 3 miles long emptied the mountain. And he, as a carpenter, went down to the 15 levels into the mountain where he was able to work constructing this facility. But he said there was an equal number of levels further down to the mountain, which he didn't have for. So perhaps by chance, or maybe a synchronicity, we were guided to this place in the Santa Susana Pass to do our CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, field work. And so there was a long tradition of sightings at this facility. I was not aware of it when I first started working there, but we saw golden globes. Red orbs appeared to go up and down behind the mountain where we were working in the pass. One night we had some very unusual lights that signaled that I had the ridge line in the Santa Susana Pass. And For the next 5 years, I led a team of contact activists, I call them, or contact workers. These are people who are trained in rudimentary psi techniques, meditation, thought projection, and we would go out into the field, and to our delight, UFOs would show up where there was limited signaling, flashing powerful lights back and forth between us and what were the UFOs. So this is the process that got me started, and I was doing that work for 5 years and had many encounters with what are called now UAPs or UFOs or flying saucers. So that's how I got started in the work.
I see. You know what I'm going to have to do here is why don't you send me over a text with your phone number, or actually, why don't you write this down and you just give me a call back on your phone, because we're having Skype issues. Your Skype is cutting in and out, and the audio is not working. So you got a pen and paper? Write down the number.
I hear you loud and clear. So let me write this down. Go ahead. What's your number?
603-967-4030. And I didn't. Okay. We have another break coming up, but I didn't want to wait till the break. I just thought.
Okay.
Might as well get
603-967-4030.
Yeah. All right. Give me a call back if you would.
I shall right away. Thank you.
All right. So hang in there, everyone. He is going to call back. We're going to get him an audio. We're obviously going to have to change the. We don't have an image yet. So just hang in there. We'll be right back. And should be calling in any second. Sometimes live doesn't work all that well, and you know, sometimes I wish I went back to the name of my show, which is Podcast UFO, but that's just the case. He's not calling in. I heard him repeat the number. I'm not getting a call yet. So I'll wait for a while, and if here he comes, and that's not going to work.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not working. I'm gonna have to call you back. Hang on, I'll call you back. So I know I just cut out Race over there at KGR Radio. I apologize for that. Race, since you talked before, you might as well talk now. Is the audio clear? Not hearing you. All right. So just hang in, everyone. I'm going to join the call this way. All right. Again, just hang in, everyone. I just have to make this all work. And again, I apologize, everyone, for all the issues we're having today. Trying to get back to the main page. Skype can make it difficult sometimes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
You're back on Skype.
I'm back on Skype. Can you see me?
Yeah, but it's still not working. I gotta try to give you a ring. It's just not going to work. I just heard it clip. So
okay.
Yeah. Let me just.
It's the wireless that does it.
Yeah. Sorry, Race. So hang in there,
sorry.
listeners. I'm going to dial the number, and let me try that again. Okay. And I wish I could tone out this. The number, but I don't have a way to do that.
Hello?
Hello, is that we got you on the phone?
Not yet. I'm still back on Skype. Is this a better connection?
It sounds better so far.
Yeah, I'm very close to the modem.
Okay, yeah, it sounds. Let's go with this. And again, listeners, thank you so much for being patient. We're going to give this a try, and that's better. It sounds better so far.
25 seconds to bumper.
Oh, okay. So we're going to go to a break anyway. Perfect timing. So hang in there, and we'll be talking during the break. So just hang in there. So I want to thank.
We're already in the break, Martin.
Got it. Okay.
So we're coming back from the break now.
Got it.
I had to go to a break when the connection dumped.
I got it. Okay.
It was pure dead air, so.
All right.
I had to.
Sure.
I had to dump out.
Just count me down.
Okay, you got it. Stand by, gentlemen. Okay, here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, everyone, welcome back and to KGRA Radio. My guest is Joseph Burkes. Hopefully, we've got the audio issue worked out. He's on top of his modem, he says, and so that should work better. Why don't you? I think you're just about done wrapping up. One thing I have to tell you, I've been pretty cruel talking about Greer over the years, and I've had.
Did you say cool or cruel?
Cruel. I've been cruel, and it's just because I think he's taken advantage of people, and he's one of these people, and I think he's pretty fringy. And I understand you both are medical doctors, and I understand the connection there. And it's just my opinion. My opinion is that I understand he could make a lot of money I believe he was a surgeon, maybe, perhaps, but I can't remember.
He was a trauma surgeon. He was an ER doctor who did medical procedures and surgical procedures in the ER.
Now, I will say, at the beginning, I thought he did some wonderful work, but I think he went off the rails. And I don't believe in his work. I don't think he's good for the UFO field. And if
we could spend the rest of our show doing a detailed analysis of Stephen Greer, MD, because I got to see him 1 year after he was recruited by Naval Intelligence, and when I was working with him, the name Ron Pandolfi and Dan Smith were household terms. So I could tell you the story, how it came down. It's never been shared publicly before, although in terms of a radio show, although I have written about it on my Facebook page.
All right, sure, I'm open to hear. So he claims that he was in Naval Intelligence. He was.
No, he wasn't. He didn't claim. He told me that in 1991, after he had a number of sightings in full uniform, a gentleman by the name of Commander Will Miller came to his home and offered to assist him in the Sea-SETI project. I got to meet Commander Will Miller in 1995 at the Greer home, and then again in 1997, where I met Edgar Mitchell, who was also part of Dr. Greer's, for want of a better term, entourage, at the behind closed door briefings that were held in 1997 spring in Washington, D.C., where a number of Congress people and their staff showed up to be briefed on the UFO subject. But my interest was primarily in the contact aspect of the work, and so for 5 years, that was my main activity. Project Starlight, which then became the Disclosure Project, was something that I was supportive of, but I really didn't have much to do with, except participate in a few meetings, one of which was in Washington, D.C. I think if you want to understand Dr. Stephen Greer, you have to understand that the best paradigm to follow the UFO subject is not a scientific one. It's a counterintelligence one. You're familiar with counterintelligence operations, correct?
Not exactly. I couldn't name any particular counterintelligence operation.
Does the name Sergeant Doty ring a bell?
Oh yeah, Richard Doty.
Richard Doty, yes.
Mm-hmm.
How about Mr. Elizondo? That he's very prominent now.
I wouldn't call him a counterintelligence. And what's your reasoning for that?
He was a DIA counterintelligence officer, and that's his CV. He worked in that field for many years.
I see what you're saying. I thought you meant now he is one.
Oh, I suspect he is as well. But there's not a problem with that. You have to understand that the UFO phenomena threatens all terrestrial elites on this planet. If you're a military man and you're confronted with hardware that can fly circles around your best performance aircraft, you're going to naturally perceive this as a threat. If UFOs are showing up repeatedly over nuclear facilities and on occasion interacting with them and interfering with their function, damaging them in some way, this is a counterintelligence problem. This is not rocket science. It's just a simple way that the United States is going to defend its most prized possessions, nuclear weapons, and the most dangerous possessions at that. Mm-hmm. If this phenomena is not only psychic, but also technological, then it's clear that what we call UFOs are highly advanced in terms of their propulsion systems, and they are not flying on fossil fuels. So people like to say that, oh, if we had free energy of UFOs, what wonderful things we would be able to do. Well, let me tell you, the application of all advanced technology here on Earth is usually weapons first. So here again, you have another defense aspect. If the United States can work by back engineering down to ET craft and discover the basis of their propulsion systems, not only would they be able to be used as weapons, but we could use them to deter any other enemy of the United States that had developed similar capabilities. Are you following me now in terms of the counterintelligence aspects of the UFO phenomenon?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
In addition, the largest industry on this planet is the petrochemical industry. And if free energy were suddenly handed to us, not only would it likely be used as weapons, but it also would lead to a global economic crisis because of the millions of people who are employed in fossil industry all of a sudden would be out of work. The corporations that control the industry would be out of profits. It would create a series of crises.
I
you see that.
Mm-hmm.
So that this issue is not only counterintelligence oriented, but it's also a threat to some of the most powerful economic interests on the planet. And then you have politicians. The United States is one of many nations. However, the message of the so-called aliens is in some ways similar to the message that our astronauts had when they looked down on Earth. You know, when you fly over the Earth in a space capsule, you don't see dividing lines between Canada and the United States, nor do you see them anywhere else. There are no boundaries. There are no borders. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we are one planet and one people is going to get very popular if people on this planet realize that there are extraterrestrials, advanced civilizations contacting this planet. And what is going to happen to the national politicians who base their power on defending their country from other countries? And all of a sudden, everyone is saying we're one planet, one people, and there'll be a even greater push to have integration, not only economically, which we now have with the world market, where you buy cars that are made, parts are made in 10 different countries, but one planet, one people in terms of political identification. So politicians, understandably, might be threatened in that kind of environment. And then you have the religious aspects, which are considerable, because some people believe, if you watch Ancient Aliens, they certainly promote the notion that this is not a recent phenomenon, but an ancient one. And people are going to ask, what if the great wisdom traditions of our planet that we call religion, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, that many of their saints or messengers of God, like Muhammad or Jesus or Moses, were in fact contactees. And this is something that Jacques Vallée has discussed. It's a very controversial subject, and I bring it up, but I don't want to dwell on it because we're sort of playing with fire here. Because the religions are the social glue that holds our civilization together in terms of our ethics, our morality, our legal traditions are based on traditions that came out of wisdom traditions. We're talking about the major religions of our planet. Are you getting any of this? Do we have a good connection?
No, I can hear you good. You're doing good. If you can just try to keep your computer still, that would be good. If you could remember to do that. Sure.
Okay. I can move it to another platform. Okay.
I don't want to mess anything up that's working.
Okay. I'll just stop moving.
Yeah.
I will continue to breathe, however.
As far as the politics go, I get what you're saying. It's kind of like what Reagan used to say a number of times. Like if we were ever attacked from an alien world, we would all join together. And it really, there really is something to that. I think we would come together more as a planet instead of divided lines that we fight so hard for and lose so many lives for. So many wars going on about territory, and also about when you go back to the free energy. It would have to be a very slow transition. If it was a major, quick transition to free energy, right, there would be a definite market crash right off the bat first. And, there's plenty of people making billions of dollars that would fight tooth and nail, life or death to, continue that way of living. There would have to be, someday, some type of energy, whether it's free energy, but we have to do something. We are addicted to fossil fuel, and we have to. I know this subject is we're supposed to be talking about UFOs, but I get where you were going. If they have a technology that we can figure out, and perhaps they don't. Perhaps they have a way of harnessing something that we haven't understood yet, and that we may or may not be able to replicate.
That is correct. There are great mysteries involved, but I think if the Roswell crash is not just legend or myth, but the witnesses accurately described what happened over 70 years ago, there's been a long time for American scientists and perhaps from other nations as well to study many aspects of the flying saucer technology. Nobody knows how far along they've gotten, but as I agree with you, suddenly integrating such technologies into our technological culture could have disastrous consequences. So with that analysis, that this, from my point of view as a peace and social justice activist, is one who has been involved with working around issues of world peace. And I was a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility, which was part of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War that won the Nobel Prize in 1985. I see the UFO problem through the blinders, perhaps, or at least the prism of being someone who is very interested in having good relations, not only here on Earth between nations, but also if the extraterrestrials are here, to try to reach out and extend a hand of friendship to them as well. And this is why I found Dr. Greer's initial message of the CE5 initiative very attractive. Sure enough, as I tried to say earlier when we had technical problems, my contact team went into operation in 1992, And right off the bat, we had sightings of anomalous structured objects that at least fulfilled our definition of UFOs. And on several occasions, for example, in Mexico in 1993, when I was there at the base of Popocatépetl volcano with 4 other researchers, including Dr. Greer, a UFO the size of a city block came out behind the volcano, and this was 100 miles to the east of Mexico City in the volcanic zone, massive volcanoes. The UFO that we saw that night and signaled at us was several hundred feet across. It blacked out the sky as it moved. You could not see stars behind it. It was a solid object. And I can tell you, it was not the Mexican Air Force on maneuvers. So I was very enthusiastic initially. However, things did not always go as we had planned. And we had a number of problems, which I can get into, that were both based on in terms of the limitations of our teams, as well as the fact that our teams were under considerable surveillance. And that mainly had to do with Dr. Greer's relationship with the intelligence community.
So you're totally convinced that he actually has a connection to the intelligence community still?
I met the head of the Arlington Institute, a man by the name of John Peterson, who was part of Dr. Greer's entourage in 1992. They were as thick as thieves. He was the man, a personal friend of CIA Director Woolsey, who set up what Dr. Greer called a briefing, but really was not a briefing. It was a meeting that went on for 2.5 hours. I was very much aware that Dr. Greer, like Tom DeLonge, and before Dr. Greer, like Bill Moore, were working with insiders as part of what Grant Cameron calls a gradual acclimation program to alert the public to the reality of UFOs. I highly recommend Grant Cameron's book. I have to say that I was very confused about what was going on with CSETI in terms of the early years, because given my background in peace and social justice, I looked with great suspicion at his contacts within the intelligence community. When I met John Peterson in 1992, he talked about his job as a Navy aviator, an elite airman who was based in the Tonkin Bay. And his job was to support American fighting men and women against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese regulars. But as a peace and social justice activist, I was very much aware of the tremendous cost the bombing campaign against Vietnam had in terms of hundreds of thousands of people being killed, civilians. So I did not appreciate Dr. Greer's connection with many of these people, and that contributed in part to my leaving CSETI in 1998 after working with him for 5 years.
So you're not a part of that anymore at this point?
I haven't spoken to Dr. Greer in 20 years. I support his early work in terms of the CE5 initiative. However, other developments have occurred which have to do with his role in this, what Grant Cameron calls acclimatization program or acclimation program. There are aspects of that work which involve release of disinformation, and that I don't like. It's not an easy thing to accept that the person that you had great confidence in for many years is putting out information that's obviously untrue.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. And I have watched his films that he's tried to make, and and I don't know if this is true or not, but I understand that he still believes in the Atacama. I want to say the being that was found in the Atacama Desert. He still believes that is basically alien, as far as I know. Maybe he doesn't believe it, but I think that's what I'm hearing.
I think what happened to Dr. Greer is what happens to any individual who is cut off from his profession In 1997 and 98, he made a decision to stop working as an emergency room physician. And he was basically left without any support. He was working, when we worked together as an ER, we didn't work in the same ER, but as fellow ER physicians, he was making more money than I was, close to $200,000 a year. And when he gave up his work in medicine, he had several children at home. He wanted to put them through college. He had other bills to pay. And so all of a sudden, the training of the workshops that when I was trained by him was $40, 1993. Now, all of a sudden, he's charging $2,000 and $3,000 for a 1-week seminar that was basically supplying him with sustenance. And the videos and the sensational claims that he made, the exaggerations that he made, are understandable in terms of someone who now had to make a living within in the cottage industry of the UFO subculture, selling books, selling videos, and that sort of thing.
I really hate to see it. I understand that, someone has to make a living. I get that, and I'm lucky I don't have to make a living in doing what I'm doing. This is, I do this for fun. But I understand there's that struggle, but there's also, you saw when the line was crossed, and unfortunately you were smart enough to stop participating. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are caught with this, and I've likened, you may not like this, but I've likened him to a cult leader, and I don't know, what your thoughts are on that, but
a cult is a secular religion, and the accusation has been made by our critics that all of ufology is a cult, a secular religion or a cult.
I get that. Yeah.
Call each other, can call each other names. I think what confuses people about CSETI, I'm sorry, I'm moving the computer. What confuses people about CSETI is that they confuse consciousness work, remote viewing, and using applied psi as with religion. It is not. But there are spiritual aspects of the work which take on the characteristic of religion. And I can see why people might accuse us going out in the field and meditating. I think it was George Knapp who said, Dr. Greer's followers pray to UFOs. Well, we don't pray to them, but we use telepathy to attempts to attract them to our research sites. So no, I don't think CSETI or the work that I did was a cult, but I'm given the consciousness aspects of the work and the spiritual messages that many contactees receive, I can understand that confusion.
Okay, I'm also going to let people call in now. So if you'd like to call in, now you did try to call me earlier, and I was not able to join the call correctly. So I'm not sure if that's going to work tonight, but we'll give it a shot. And that number is going up on the screen on YouTube over at KGR Radio. This is live show only call, and that's 603-967-4030. If you'd like to call in and ask our guest some questions. So if someone doesn't call in, I'm just going to continue on here. And
I do apologize for sleeping through the beginning of the segment. I had to get out of sick bed to do this. And
yeah, well, I appreciate that. Yeah. And okay, so when you're talking about this meditation and beckoning the UFO, I actually have a friend that went to one of the sessions or whatever you want to call it out in I think it was Upper State New York, if I remember right, and they actually saw things. Now, do you think that when there's a group there that there may be I don't want to say like an illusion, but perhaps there could be a satellite or something. Do you think people get too enthusiastic to see something? Do you ever see that?
Well, sure. I think that's true. That's the purpose of. That's the reason why field investigators, whether they work for MUFON or the CE5 initiative, need to be well versed in astronomy and have sky charts that show when satellites go over. When you have a large group, there are always people who every plane in the sky is a UFO. And I can tell you that I'm never going to be able to vector in 747s that fly overhead. But I have been successful in attracting UFOs that fulfill the criteria that have been set down by Skywatch organizations like MUFON that fulfill the criteria that they are indeed anomalous objects. So the answer is yes, there is that confusion for some people. My team, for example, had on it 3 physicians, one of which was a private pilot. We had several pilots also. There was a 747 pilot, Captain Joe Villiers, who was also part of our team. So we had a very high-powered team where that did not go on. But I'm sure that in other settings, people do get confused. Now, you've touched upon a very important point that you asked me whether some of these things could have been illusions. And if we have time during the next 45 minutes, I will take you on a journey of how the intelligence behind this phenomena, that I like to call UFO intel or UFO intelligence, how they took me on a series of contact experiences which showed me how they actually create illusions. And out of these experiences, I developed a theory that I call the virtual experience hypothesis, and one of which I call a virtual experience of the first kind, in which holographic type of technology is used by not humans, but the intelligence behind UFOs to create illusions that we identify as flying saucers. But that would require considerable explanation. And maybe there's a phone call coming in that needs to be addressed.
And how did you know that? One is coming in right now. So,
lucky guess.
Yeah, maybe you do have some type of conscious telepathy or something. Caller.
How you doing?
Hi. Your first name? Where are you calling from?
Brian from Frederick.
What state is that?
Maryland.
Maryland. Hi. Welcome to the show. You have a question for our guest?
I do. Now, when you say you saw a craft or whatever, you saw light. Did you ever see a craft, or was it just only light?
Okay, very good question. First of all, the encounter at the base of Popocatépetl volcano, February 1, 1993, it was night, was a large triangular-shaped object. It appeared, we know the distance, it was 7 miles away because I had gotten from UCLA detailed maps showing the relationship of the 2 volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. And this object initially appeared as an amber light in the distance. We signaled at it, and it changed direction. It had initially been moving at an oblique angle away from our position. As soon as we signaled at it, it started heading right towards us. It was moving not very quickly by the time it got to within a mile, but it was clearly a triangular shape. It was several hundred feet across because it passed over a ridge line that, from my maps, was exactly 1 mile away. And on this ridge line was a small church, maybe 50 feet across. And this triangular-shaped anomalous object that was totally silent made that church on the horizon look like a matchbox toy. It was several times larger. And as it maneuvered towards us, we signaled at it, and it signaled back. It got within a few hundred yards of our position, and I know this sounds kind of wild, but back in the old days of the CE5 initiative, we actually hoped to have a landing and a boarding. I know that sounds extreme, but that's what we were operating on. And I was very impressed by this because I had had other contact experiences and sightings, but nothing that large, that close, and that convincing. And we signaled at it, it signaled back. On each of the apices of the triangle was a light, and it signaled at us from all 3 lights. So that was an object. At least that's what we thought it was. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's pretty freaking cool, man.
That was my impression too. All I kept saying is, yes, we're not alone in the universe. However, subsequent experiences where the UFO intelligence showed me how they create illusion brought into question my own sightings as well as others. But that's a whole nother story.
All right, you have any other questions?
Well, do you think that it could be like maybe like terrestrial electrogravitic technology, or maybe like some type of like, I mean, when you see the light, like some type of cloaking? I don't know.
These are excellent questions. I commend you because the question is, rumors have been circulating for decades now that the United States and maybe other nations are back engineering UFOs and perhaps have within their possession what you would call secret space programs, where copies of UFOs are being built by military, in our case, the American military. So the question is, if you see a UFO, is it ours, meaning back engineered, or not ours, meaning perhaps extraterrestrial? Well, I can tell you that if that UFO was American built, it was operating 1,500 miles away from the American border, American homeland, and if anything happened to it and it went down, it would be very difficult for the United States to extract its technology with the Mexican military showing up to investigate. So in that case, because of the size of the object and the distance that we were from America, I'm pretty well convinced it was not a back-engineered ET craft. It was
that makes total sense.
It makes very large. It was very large. I mean, I'm talking about something 200-300 feet across. It was not the Mexican Air Force on maneuvers. Totally silent.
That's
no
pretty
wings.
Cool, man.
No visible means of propulsion.
Hey, thanks for the call.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good one. All right. So the line's open if anyone else wants to call in. That number's up on the screen, or if you're over at KGRA Radio, it's 603-967-4030, and we welcome your call. It sounds like you've had a lot of sightings. Would you want to guess how many sightings that you think you've had?
Probably two or three dozen, but not hundreds of sightings. I'm not what they call an antenna, or I'm not what I call a prime contactee. There are people who are specially trained, that I got to meet several of them, who are contactees, and they are trained in special consciousness techniques as either teenagers, children, or young adults. These people, like Stephen Greer was in the beginning, not so much anymore, I think, but in the beginning, Dr. Greer couldn't go anywhere without UFOs showing up. I went out in the field with him maybe a half dozen times. Every time I was out in the field with him, we saw an anomalous structured object. There was sometimes signaling back and forth, sometimes not. When my team went out, we had sightings about a third of the time, perhaps half. But there are people who are specially trained who claim to have onboard experiences, as Dr. Greer claimed he did. They are treated like family by UFO Intel. But I'm not like one of them. So I only had a few dozen sightings in the course of field work. But if you associate with such individuals, and this is key, it's like in Hollywood. I lived in Los Angeles for 30 years. And in Hollywood, they say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to having sightings, if you can get to be a friend or hang out with one of these, what I call prime contactees, people who have been specially trained and have this unique relationship with UFO intelligence, you will see all kinds of things that you didn't believe were possible. So I actually developed a designation as prime contactee. I've met about a half dozen of these people. Most of them are men. Most of them are trained via telepathic communication. And when you are a prime contactee, as the joke goes, you will never be lonely again, because UFO intelligence will manifest sightings wherever these people go. So it's like in Hollywood. If you want a good job, it's not what you know in terms of your talent as an actor or producer. It's who you know in terms of connections with the hierarchy in Hollywood, the Hollywood elite. That'll get you the jobs, and that'll get you the sightings if you're with a prime contactee.
I don't know. I'm on the fence about this. I feel skeptical of it. I guess it's something that I'd have to actually, I'd have to see for myself. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I just feel like I'd have to see this for myself to really believe this is real, what you're saying.
What you're saying is true, that seeing is believing, and also believing is seeing. And this is part of the equation that's very difficult for us to understand. After I left CSETI, and it was very unpleasant leaving the organization because I had dedicated thousands of hours to what I imagined was the cause of interplanetary diplomacy. And so it was very unpleasant for me to leave the organization under circumstances that personally were very negative. Around the time that I left, I was also threatened. People were calling my home, and one individual who sounded like an intelligence officer or maybe a lawyer working for the military, he basically said, "It'd be better for you." He didn't use the expression "would be better for your health," but he said it would better be for you. And he's calling me at home if you were no longer part of CSETI. So there are a lot of issues that I had in terms of leaving CSETI. Dr. Greer's association with the intelligence community, which is, undoubted. I mean, look who was on part of his entourage. Edgar Mitchell was working very closely with Dr. Greer. And at that behind closed door briefing in Washington, D.C. in 1997, I got to meet Edgar Mitchell. A moonwalking astronaut was helping him get witnesses. So there are, and Edgar Mitchell, like me and many, many other people, very dedicated to the cause of openness on the subject, left Stephen Greer and won't have anything to do with him because of the problems that he got into, which I think makes people like you, Martin, feel he's not legit. He is legit, but only up until a certain point. And his legitimacy has been undermined, in my opinion, by his relationship with the intelligence and counterintelligence community.
What about things where people have told me, this is all secondhand stories, but have told me that he charged people to take a photo of themselves inside of a UFO that was supposedly there. And he locked people into one of his conferences, with security guards at the door, things like that. I mean, are these...
That's the unfortunate part of relying on rumors. I wasn't at that event that you described where the doors were locked. I think it happened in Barcelona in 2009 or 2010.
That's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I spoke to someone who was there, and what you heard was not exactly correct. There were security guards running around, and at one point the doors were locked because there were people who were trying to get in for free, and so the doors were locked. That was the story as explained to me by an eyewitness. Then there was other unfortunate events that occurred where Dr. Greer was rather, I believe, insensitive to the audience. Now, he's in Spain in 2010. If you know anything about Spanish history, you know that they lived under fascism for 30, 40 years under the Franco dictatorship. So there was one emotionally distraught fellow who was trying to get Dr. Greer's attention before he got on stage. And Dr. Greer, according to this eyewitness that I trust, he asked me not to use his name, but he's a prominent investigator, said Dr. Greer just brushed this guy off. Well, when Dr. Greer was on the stage, this gentleman rushed the stage and got on the stage and starts trying to ask him the question that he wasn't allowed to ask in private. Well, Dr. Greer had security people who escorted that individual off the stage. Now, I've heard Stephen Greer supporters tell that was an attempt on Dr. Greer's life.
Yeah, I always hear stuff like that. Yeah.
And I've been
Because
told
he knows too much.
that Dr. Greer has told those stories as well. Well, I didn't hear them from Dr. Greer, but I did hear them from others, and I corrected them on that. Dr. Greer, at that 2009 or 2010 Barcelona meeting, made some rather insensitive remarks where he was on the stage where he said something like, if I told you what I know about the phenomena, I would have to get you killed. You know, like that joke that Obama makes when 10-year-olds ask him about what happens in the Oval Office when they discuss UFOs. And President Obama said, if I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Right.
Well, Dr. Greer apparently used that same I think it's somewhat in poor taste. Well, people get angry because here's an authority figure threatening to kill them, and they've lived under fascism for 30 years. You know what I'm saying? It's that sort of thing.
Yeah. We have a caller on the line. Caller, is it Donnie?
It is, Martin. How are you? It's your neighbor in Western Maine.
Hey, good. Thanks for calling in. So this is Donnie, who's actually been in the studio a number of times.
Hi, Don.
Yeah. He has
Studio looks a lot better than the last time I saw it, Martin. It's improved quite a bit.
Yeah.
I just had a quick observation I wanted to make with the guests. Firstly, I hold in high regard men and women who go out there, who are medical professionals, in your case, a physician, go out there and deliver services to the needy, and in particular people who may be guests in this country, migrant farm workers, and I think that's wonderful. And I would never degrade or I would never question your integrity, because obviously you're a man of integrity. But one thing that sticks in my craw with this whole unique group of people that when they're there, you know, you're going to see things, and when you go to Popocatépetl and between Puebla and Mexico City with these people, you're going to see things. And I come from a background in the law. I mean, I was a police investigator, and an attorney for nearly my entire adult life. And the thing that just really bothers me about that is, you know, these things are going to appear. Where are the cameras? You're there with a. I'm not saying as a slam against you, so please don't take it that way. But
this is a great question. This is a great question because I left out the part of the story about Popocatépetl that's very important, and your question gives me an opportunity. So go ahead, complete your question and I'll answer it.
Okay, Doctor. And I think that, you know, we have an aviation specialist there as well. I think you mentioned some 47 Heavy pilot who, you know, it's the cream of the crop really of all commercial airline pilots.
Right.
You know, why didn't somebody have a FLIR or infrared night vision camera rolling? Why didn't somebody have cameras that took different images across the visible and the invisible light spectrum?
Yes.
All of these different things. Think about the treasure trove of evidence that would have produced, and the people who were going to this thing knew that these things, or they told everybody that they knew these things were going to appear, so everybody was on notice.
Yes. I get. Okay, this is a great question because I've written a position paper on, and the title of the position paper is "Why Does UFO Intelligence Deny Experiencers Quality Videos of Them?" Okay, you have to remember that in the UFO field, because the majority of people are very skeptical, they say that if you don't have a photograph of your encounter, it didn't happen. And then if you do produce a photograph or a video, then they'll tell you it's a CGI, it's a hoax. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
No, I get that. I get that. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I've sent people to prison for long periods of time based on testimonial evidence. So people get up on the stand and they tell their version, and at the end of it, the jury chooses to believe the person's testimony, and the defendant goes to jail for a long period of time. I get that. I really do. And I'm not discounting the fact that there are people who are just witnesses to these things and they see things. But what I'm saying is, for God's sake, you know these things are going to be there. You know that these things are going to appear.
Let me explain to you what happened, okay? I'm going to cut you off because this is going to require a little bit of explanation. I think I got.
Okay, I'll hang up and take the answer offline. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Thank you, Donnie.
All right, so what happened in Popocatépetl is very instructive, okay? We had with us, this is 1993, so we did not have a full array of inexpensive infrared or night vision goggles. We had Olympus 60 zoom camera that was the state of the art then, but wasn't really very effective at night. But what happened was truly amazing, because as this UFO starts coming out between the volcanoes and as it's approaching to us, and now this is the part that some of you in the audience are going to say, oh, Dr. Burkes is now going to tell a whopper. But what happened at that point was every piece of our electronic and non-electronic camera equipment stopped functioning. We had a cheap Brownie, what they used to call Hawkeye, or little click. It had a spring-operated mechanism. That stopped working. We had a 35 millimeter single-lens reflex with a computer chip. That camera stopped working. And the Olympus state-of-the-art video camera stopped working as well. And it was kind of weird because when we examined the camera afterwards, you could hear us talking about what happened before the sighting, and then you can hear about what happened after the sighting and the audio. But when the sighting actually occurred and this object was close, none of our equipment worked. And I'm talking about even squeezing down on the Brownie, the spring-operated camera, it did not click. Now, what do you go away from that experience with? You can say, well, Dr. Burkes just made this up, or that he's lying. Or you could say that perhaps someone that has the capability of doing this, and I think it was UFO intelligence, prevented us from getting that documentation. Dr. Greer has only been able to produce quality video on one occasion, and that was the Gulf Breeze sighting that occurred in the spring of 1992. But I can tell you that was a very important sighting because it recruited me, and it happened a short distance away from the Pensacola Naval Air Station. This is Gulf Breeze. Now, there was 3 UFOs, or maybe 4, that showed up, and on that footage, you can clearly see the UFOs, the power ring, and the signaling back and forth. That video is available on the internet, and on the basis of that video, I joined CSETI. But I can tell you that if CSETI got quality video of UFOs every time it went out in the field, there would be millions of looky-loos following us around trying to get pictures, and we would never be able to do our research in anything that would approach security or confidentiality. Now, I believe that the capability exists to get that documentation, and it is my hope that the contact network that I'm an activist in, even though I don't have anything to do with Dr. Greer, I still keep tabs on the network that he founded with Sherry Adamek. And I think that someday UFO Intel will not jam our cameras, but they will allow us to not only get video documentation of our encounters with him, but we will be able to get live footage that we can broadcast over the internet, just like this conversation is being broadcast. And what I envision in the future is that teams, perhaps dozens of teams all over the world, linked to the internet, getting quality video of the encounters of UFO craft. In order to do that, there would have to be a stand-down order from the military that has, in the past, on many occasions, attempted and possibly successfully shot them down.
So do you think that they're just any type of equipment at all that would be interrupted? You said a Brownie camera. These are, for the person that's young and that never heard of them before, these are old cameras back in I think in the 40s they started. I can't remember exactly when. but they were these cameras that anyone could afford and have, and very simple mechanical camera. And we're not talking digital here; we're talking film, developing all that stuff. So
the only electronic part of that camera is the flash.
Right.
Everything is mechanical.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
UFO intelligence shut down our cameras, in my opinion, although I can't prove it.
Well, you know, I would pass that off as just another, you know, kind of far out thing. But so many people have said that. You know, people that I've known that actually had an encounter, they had video equipment right there, and the battery all of a sudden was dead on all of their equipment. They had 2 or 3 cameras, battery dead on every one of them, cell phone, battery dead, everything. And that goes along with people talking about their cars having an ignition interference and nothing at all working in their car. So, but when it comes to a mechanical camera, that doesn't even seem like it could make any sense.
Well, you know, this is if I had time, and perhaps you'll forgive me for being late, and you'll invite me back some future time. But if I had time, I could take you through the step-by-step journey, how UFO intel, or if you want to call it UFO intelligence, or a higher intelligence agency, that's the way Jacques Vallée referred to them once in Messengers of Deception, that they took me on a series of encounters where they showed me how they create illusion. And one of the things they do is that they can put down onto camera images that don't represent any physical object. So you will be shooting the sky. Later on, you don't see anything. Later on, you see a UFO. Was that really there? Or did they mechanically, using their command of electromagnetism, digitally impart that image on the camera? And there's some evidence in the paranormal literature to show how this could be done. If anyone has read or seen the very important video about the Skoll investigations in England in the 1990s, it's called the Afterlife Experiment, or the Afterlife Investigation. That's it. It's available free on YouTube. Investigators working with what they thought were spirits had film that was from the factory, undeveloped, and when they had encounters with beings on this film, when it was developed on site, they saw images of people and places, people who had died, and images from years past. Well, if so-called spirits can do that in paranormal investigations, I think UFO intelligence can probably do the same. So is it real? Or as the old commercial used to go, I'm dating myself now, or is it Memorex? Remember?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. That was for those of the millennials out there listening. That's those were tapes. They were cassette tapes that you could record on, and that's how we used to get our music. Used to record on those tapes and listen to them. I also remember 8-tracks. So.
Yes, we are definitely the older generation.
Yeah,
getting older all the time.
That's right.
So are there any other questions?
I know there's been a bunch of questions that have come up on the chat room. I just have not been able to get to them, and anyone is welcome to call in to ask your question. If I missed you and you're in the chat right now, that number is 603-967-4030. Getting back to the imaging you're talking about, it just makes me want to say why, the first thing that just comes to my mind, whether it makes any sense or not, is why would they do that? Why would anything put an image on through a camera? What would be the purpose of it, I guess? Have you thought about that part of it?
Yes, I've thought about it extensively, and although the answers may not satisfy others, at least they give me a sense of understanding. One of the reasons UFO intel produces holographic-like projections that we identify as flyings, as UFOs or spacecraft, is that if live crews are flying over hostile territory, and we have a thing in the United States that's called the sovereign airspace, any craft that enters our airspace uninvited, refuses to identify itself, can be attacked. The UFO literature is full of attempts at shoot downs, whether it be in Tehran, in the Iranian case back, I think, 1973,
Right.
or back in the 50s when there were attempts to shoot them down. So if you want to announce your presence and you have a technology that can produce holographic images that people can actually videotape and think are physical objects, you're not putting your crews at risk. Just think of the space gas. I don't think these UFOs are flying around with gasoline, but just think of the space gas or their equivalent of whatever they're using in their propulsion system is. If they don't have to fly to interact with us, but they can produce holographic type technology. So these are 2 or 3 reasons why they might do that.
I'm not quite following you about the purpose of why they would do that. Like a holographic image, I'm not talking about on film right now, but you're talking about when people actually see a UFO, it's not really there?
Oh, sure. The UFO intelligence showed me how they do it. In 1993, I was working with this Russian contactee. I really should publish a book about this because this was a young man, 21 years old. I'm 42. He shows up in my emergency room. I'm going to use a pseudonym on him. His name, I call him Misha. And he asked me soon after he gets the job as an EKG tech, what do I think of UFOs? And I don't know this guy. I'm doing contact work, but I haven't announced to the medical group or a lot of people that I'm going out in the desert to attract UFOs. Later on, I got very open about it. But I gave some answer to this guy, Misha. I said, I don't know. If there weren't intelligence out there, it'd be an incredible waste of space. That line from Jodie Foster's movie Contact. So a year later, after I'm running a contact team, he introduces himself as a high-level contactee who's had many sightings, sort of like Dr. Greer. He's a magnet for this phenomena. And he wants to join my now well-established contact team. So I said to him, why didn't you tell me who you were a year ago? His answer was chilling. He said to me, I didn't tell you, Dr. Burkes, because you weren't ready yet. And in other words, the implication was that he was in direct telepathic communication with the UFO intelligence. And they gave him to me as a guide, but I had to, shall we say, no longer be wet behind my ears in terms of the contact work before I could integrate a high-powered contactee into my team. As soon as he joined the team, wonderful things started happening for me personally. My psychic ability went way up. I started having what's called contact downloads. On 2 occasions, not 1, but 2, I was given a heads up telepathically as to when, where, and how many craft were going to be showing up during the course of our field work, hours before the events occurred. And so Dr. Greer had alerted us to telling us this could happen. So if you have a very vivid image of when, or a knowingness of when the craft are going to appear, share that with your coworkers. And I did. I said in October of 1993, when I got this telepathic override, and we're in Joshua Tree, spectacular, beautiful, pristine setting, in the high desert, I told them showtime is 2 o'clock, 2 a.m. And we took shifts of skywatch, rest, thought projection. I said, I'm taking the first shift resting. Wake me up at 10 to 2. Sure enough, they woke me up at 10 to 2, and one UFO appeared just as I had been told in the northwest sky at 2 o'clock in the morning, on the dot. This happened again later on in 1994 when we did a shoot with the Encounters television program. I was told 3 UFOs were going to show up at 9 o'clock at night, on the money. Well, it wasn't exactly right that time. 1 UFO showed up 3 times, but it was 15 minutes to 9 o'clock, and then 15 minutes after 9. So it was close. So Misha is now part of my contact team, and we're doing, wherever we go, we're having sightings. We had a prolonged experience in November of 93 for 2.5 hours. We had what were called jumpers. They were little like points of light that were jumping across the sky. And we interacted with these jumpers for 2.5 hours during a windstorm at Joshua Tree National Monument. A year later, we went out into the field, and we wanted to have sort of like a 1-year anniversary of that 2.5-hour encounter. And we were in the same location. And I noticed that my coworker said there were shooting stars over Negri Hill. And I'm looking at the same section of sky, and I saw nothing. And he said, my vision was pretty good. I said, you saw a shooting star there? He said, yes. And I looked down the barrel of his arm. Looked down the arm as if it was the barrel of a gun. I said, where did you see it? He says, there it is. And I saw absolutely nothing. And he had seen 3 in a row. So I said to him, why don't you ask them to show me what you just saw? And he said, show Dr. Burkes. And like that, I immediately saw a pale shooting star above Negri Hill. I said to him, was that like the 3 others that you had seen? He said it was exactly like them. Now my heart starts beating because I'm thinking, this is showtime. They're showing me how they can create illusion. He saw them, shooting stars, I did not. So I said to him, show me again. And he said, show Joe. Sure enough, like that, a shooting star appeared that was exactly like the other one that I had seen and the 5 previous that he had seen in that exact location. The shooting star was the same color, the same angle that formed with the horizon, the same length of trail, all those things. My heart's pounding now, and I said, we got this thing called coincidence. Could you show me one more time? And at that point, there was a pregnant pause, as if the intelligence was saying, don't you know what we're doing? And after about 15 seconds, bingo, 3 in a row, 6 for him. Now, if they can show me visual displays of shooting stars that are exactly the same, they can do exactly the same thing for what we identify as alien craft. This is a holographic-like technology, which is something we have not achieved in this planet, but I believe it is a mechanism of contact. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll stop.
Yeah, we've got about three minutes or so to go here. So let me ask you this. So you get a message. Can you explain how that message comes to you and how you know the time and everything? Like, how do you know, like, say it's going to show up at 9 o'clock?
Well, okay. It's like for people who describe, and I'm not the only one that gets telepathic downloads, okay? It's like watching a movie in your head. It's like an awake dream. There's a series of visual images plus acquisition of information at the level of knowledge, a knowingness. Now, in the case of what happened in Joshua Tree, when I was meditating, I actually saw a UFO in my mind's eye. And
the dog a bone.
Yeah, my wife's getting dinner for the doggies, and they're saying they're hungry. Anyway, so I saw this UFO in my mind's eye. I could actually sense the jubilation of what I identified as a bunch of little ET guys, and at that point I realized how it was how people call the ETs insects because they were moving around in their craft, and I'm seeing this in my mind's eye with tremendous speed and precision. I also sensed that they had a relationship with a command ship, which I saw in my mind's eye, that was cylindrical shaped. And at the level of knowledge, I knew that these guys were going to show up at 2 o'clock. And I had a series of contact downloads for about 8 months or a year. They came on suddenly when I first started working with Misha, and they disappeared just as quickly. And I surely wanted them to come back, but they didn't. So they showed me how they did it. And now I've shared it with you.
All right. Wow. That is pretty interesting. We have just a little bit of time left. Do you have like a website or anything like that?
I do not. For years I had a website. Nobody ever showed up. So I'm not on Facebook. And on Facebook I have a following. It's called the Contact Underground, which is kind of a romantic name, or Joseph Burkes. So if you go to Contact Underground, all my reports are rotated on a 6-month basis, and eventually I'll publish a book, God willing, where you can read about all these stories, and that's my plan at least.
All right, excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much for. I'm glad you made it, and I hope you feel better. And thanks for coming on. Not feeling so well, I appreciate that.
You're very welcome, and maybe you'll invite me back. I hope so.
All right. Well, you take care.
All right.
All right. Bye now.
Bye. Bye.
All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Next week, we have Fraser Cain up. Fraser Cain, you might know him from Universe Today or Astronomy Cast. I love that podcast. It's a great one. He is a UFO skeptic, and I've actually talked him into coming on the show. We're going to be talking about UFOs a little bit and what's going on in the world of space. That's it for the show. Hope to see you next week. And for you on YouTube, I apologize for all our issues. I'll try to edit out some of this for the podcast listener, some of the issues we had. Thanks so much, everyone. And we'll be back next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.